Good evening once again. I'm Charles Coleman Jr. in for Stephanie Ruhle, and we have got a lot to talk about. Today is day 68 of the second Trump administration, and by now, the battle between Trump and some of the country's top law firms is shaking the core of the legal system. As some firms strike deals with the White House, others are choosing to fight back. Laura Jarrett has more.
Tonight, among America's top law firms, a deepening divide.
The future of the legal industry is at stake.
Major firms now facing a dilemma after President Trump revoked some of their lawyers' security clearances and threatened to cancel the government contracts of companies that work with them.
They behave very badly, very wrongly.
Some firms now taking the Trump administration to court. Others opting to cut a deal with the White House, agreeing to tens of millions of dollars of pro bono work in line with Trump priorities. The president targeting firms employing lawyers who previously investigated him, including Wilmer Hale, for decades the legal home of former special counsel Robert Mueller. The firm blasting what they say is the president's personal vendetta, retaliation for employing lawyers he dislikes. A Justice Department spokesman saying these law firms don't need or deserve taxpayer-subsidized access to national security secrets. The president's actions drawing sharp condemnation within the legal community. A federal judge this week blocking the president's executive order against another top firm, saying Mr. Trump's actions send little chills down my spine.
He's just picking on big law to kowtow to him so that they don't have the ability to represent those people who might oppose his policies.
Rachel Cohen, a junior attorney, says she was so disillusioned she quit, firing off a blistering letter criticizing firms that's gone viral.
I'm hoping it inspires those law firm leaders to do the right thing.
While partners privately fear the president's actions could result in financial ruin if clients flee.
Firms are running scared of the administration right now.
One partner telling NBC News the situation is completely demoralizing. Another saying it ultimately comes down to profits over principle, all putting a new focus on the big business of big law.
Tonight, a federal judge blocked the White House from enforcing an executive order that targets one of the firms suing the administration, calling it unconstitutional. Meanwhile, the White House is asking the Supreme Court to step in on 3 key cases that they argue are delaying Trump's agenda. The other big story today, a new report shows inflation is growing higher than expected. And the University of Michigan shows consumer sentiment fell for the 3rd time in a row across party lines and across income groups. That, along with all of the tariff threats, tanked the markets today. The Dow lost 700 points, guys, 700, while the NASDAQ and S&P both lost about 2%. And with that, let's bring in tonight's leadoff panel. John Allen is a senior national politics reporter for NBC and co-author of the new book, Fight, Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House, which is going to be out April 1st. Dave Weigel is a political reporter for Semaphore, and MSNBC legal analyst Christy Greenberg, who is a former federal prosecutor and former Southern District of New York Criminal Division Deputy Chief, is joining me. Christy, I am going to start with you. I have taken off the glasses. I am talking to a lawyer. Look, what is happening here? People need to understand. I would love for you to frame this. Paul Weiss, Covington and Burling, Wilmer Hale, Skadden Arps, these are huge, big-time firms that have all of the resources to push back, but in so many cases, they're not doing it, and they're capitulating really before the mandate is actually ordered. What's happening here?
So it's not a question about whether these executive orders targeting the law firms are constitutional or not. They are plainly unconstitutional. 3 judges have now looked at it. 3 judges have all said no go. Totally unconstitutional. Violates the First Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and the Sixth Amendment. Bad. It's also not about whether or not these would hurt the law firms financially. It's clear that they would. Paul Weiss says if we're persona non grata with the administration, if this executive order was to go through, we as a firm would not survive. Well, all 3 of the firms that actually challenged the executive orders in court also said we would suffer irreparable damage here. Perkins Coie, we wouldn't survive. So it's not about that. So what is separating the firms that are fighting from the firms that are surrendering? cowardice. I mean, they think they can just throw money at the problem. Paul Weiss is going to throw $40 million in pro bono. Skadden says, oh, we'll up it to $100 million.
Right.
And who's calling them a coward? Donald Trump. He said they're bending the knee and they're thanking me. They're saying, thank you, sir, and where can I sign? He is baiting them. And what I can't get over is just the arrogance of it on the firms that are not fighting. You've got Paul Weiss chairman Brad Karp, who sends a letter to his firm and says, look, we are still courageously standing up for fundamental rights and liberties, for the fairness of our justice system, and for society's most vulnerable individuals. That's what he said in the letter.
Cool story. Very cool story.
Totally not true, because Donald Trump is trampling all over those fundamental rights and liberties. He is attacking the fairness in the justice system. He is attacking society's most vulnerable people. And when you won't fight for them, it's clear that you won't, because when you say we can't be persona non grata with the administration or we won't survive, it's clear you're not going to take up those causes. It's clear that you're only going to align yourself with the causes that Donald Trump cares about. And that is so wrong. And I think if you want to say that, hey, it wasn't just about greed, we're not just cowards, we're doing the right thing, we're not compromising our values. Well, if you really cared about serving the public and you really cared about pro bono work, how about not becoming a dictator's puppet? How about starting there? Defend yourselves. And I just have to say, for corporate America and for other lawyers, whether you're a law student or you're an attorney or a partner, you have a choice. You can either stand with the firms that are cowards here, or you can stand with the firms that are actually putting our country first. And, I would just say, be brave, do the right thing here. The choice should be obvious.
In full disclosure, I am a former Skadden employee, and I never thought that I would see this day. But speaking in terms of serving the public, Dave, let's talk. Donald Trump talked about him being the retribution for his constituency, for his voter base. But it seems like his number one concern is going after these law firms. That is pretty much his own personal path of revenge. How does this help politically among his voters?
Among his voters, this is very specific to his problems. For a lot of those voters, I talked to them when I'm on the trail. I was in Wisconsin last week. Those problems were pretty much solved in the election. Democrats were humiliated. They're out of power for 4 years. He spent a lot of time dealing with these cases. It was 3 hours with Paul Weiss's chair in the Oval Office. Some about golf, some about this. Those are 3 hours not spent on any of the issues facing the country. So you've seen less than full support from Republicans for what he's doing. Republicans will rush out to defend Donald Trump on almost any decision he makes. The criticism that he saw in the first term has basically been disappeared because Republicans have been disappeared. They've been replaced by MAGA candidates. They have not rushed to defend what he is doing here. They have not wanted to take ownership of him taking revenge on these law firms because they look at the cases, they look at what happened to Fani Willis, they look at how he's been able to obviate the charges against him by winning the presidency, they look at the victory in the Supreme Court. This has been seen as overkill. And you don't see Republicans coming out and denouncing what he's doing, but the silence is pretty notable. I've not seen the Republicans who take this seriously, take precedent seriously, take the law seriously, say, thank you, Mr. President, for getting revenge on firms that employed some of your enemies.
So, John, given everything that Dave has just said, is it possible that this is a strategic move by the president because he knows he has Congress essentially in his back pocket, and even if he didn't, there's not much that they can do because of the gridlock there numbers-wise. And so the judiciary and the court seems like it might be the biggest roadblock to his agenda moving forward. Is this sort of hyper-focus on these law firms a sort of small admission of the fact that he knows that's where he's likely to face the biggest sense of resistance?
Yeah, I think there are a few things going on here, Charles. First of all, my friend Dave is absolutely right about Republicans not rushing to defend these actions or come out and support these actions, and at the same time passively letting them go through. I think also you make a great point in terms of who might block Donald Trump. Well, certainly lawsuits might and have blocked Donald Trump so far. They've been the biggest impediment to him. But I think there's another important thing going on here, too, which is a huge chilling effect. Even if these executive orders are not allowed to go through, What he's already gotten is agreements from 2 of these firms to basically vacate the orders in exchange for money, $140 million of free legal services. And then beyond that, you're going to see with the firms that continue to exist, businesses have been told, clients have been told, this administration will look disfavorably on you if you hire these law firms. So even if the executive orders fall, that chilling effect will continue to take place with their clients. It is a very unpredictable outcome in America that you would see the federal government basically just taking out large parts of an industry or attempting to take out large parts of an industry, not allowing people to do business, not allowing people to practice law, and in many cases practice law defending clients who may have issues with the federal government.
You know, I never thought I would see the day that these firms would capitulate to the degree that they are. But, Christy, we're going to switch gears and talk about this graduate student from Tufts. Today, a federal judge has at least temporarily blocked the deportation of this young woman. Can you talk to me about where you think that this may be headed? There are lots of issues here. How much due process should they be afforded? And what will be set as precedent moving forward with cases like this, especially with such an aggressive deportation agenda? So what are you thinking may happen, and where should we be paying attention?
Well, I think the first issue is that this student who was here on a student visa, was never given any notice that it had been revoked, was arrested and is in detention. She has not been charged with a crime. I think the first question the courts need to look at is on what basis and what authority are we arresting and detaining this person? Because the law says that you have to give her notice that the student visa was revoked, and then she could self-deport. She could decide to go back home and not be in detention at all. You have to give her an opportunity to do that. So that's kind of the first thing that strikes me. The second piece is, Marco Rubio's justification for this, of saying this person is being deported because, she is, espousing causes that are adverse to our foreign policy. And the rhetoric here of what he is saying doesn't seem to match what we are hearing about what this student and other students have done. So he is going out there and talking about the fact that these people are lunatics. They were causing riots. They were harassing students. They were taking over student property. But all we've heard about this Tufts student is that she wrote an op-ed. I mean, how is that adverse? So she can't have an opinion that's adverse to that of the United States? I mean, that's in the legislative history of this really suggests that they were trying to protect the First Amendment principles here, that they were not seeking to have this be such a broad interpretation of what is adverse to foreign policy. So he has a lot of discretion, but it seems like this is a real stretch.
Lawyer to lawyer, how difficult is it to defend against a case like this when you are right? There are no formal charges, and all you have is essentially Marco Rubio, who is the Secretary of State, basically making a claim without much evidence that this person represents a national security threat.
It's really hard. He gets to say that and he has to certify it to Congress, but where is the proof of it? And it's not clear that we're going to actually see that. And maybe that's why he is saying things that really can't be backed up with evidence, or at least not evidence that we've seen in the public domain yet.
All right, Dave, we've got to shift gears and talk about the economy. This was not a good day. That's probably an easy way to say it. This was not a good day. The markets are down, inflation is growing, and Americans are feeling increasingly pessimistic about their finances. Donald Trump campaigned on the economy. This was his thing, and the economy is not going in the right direction. What does this mean politically while he tries to continue to push his agenda? And how are Republicans in his party going to prepare for midterms next year?
Well, they look at the calendar and say there's time for this to correct. There's time for Trump policies to be put into action and maybe the benefits to be revealed. But you were talking about the campaign. That's totally correct. Trump was on the trail at rallies talking about the prices that he left office under, the price of gas, for example, at $2. Suppressed by the lack of demand during COVID. He talked about benefits that people would get. I've talked to voters who voted for Trump because he said he would make IVF free, which has not happened yet. It is something that's across purposes with a lot of conservative Republicans, pro-life Republicans. He made promises that do not add up, and in a very real way. All the Republican votes so far on spending on the coming budget have not dealt with the numbers because he promised to set a suite of tax cuts and new benefits and no economic damage. And a thing you're starting to see in the reaction to these markets are people who listen to Trump. I'm saying economic advisors, lobbyists who listened to Trump and said, he's doing what he says to get elected, but I remember his first term. He's going to have advisors who steer him away from these decisions. They did not make plans for this year thinking that he would, for example, start a trade war with Canada, being really a daily discourse with Canada about harming their economy. All the decisions he's made that rhyme with what he said on the trail, a lot of analysts thought he's doing this to win Michigan, and once the election's over, we're going to deal with the president we had him with. Steve Mnuchin was Treasury Secretary. He's not Treasury Secretary. This is a very different team. This was very predictable in the election that Trump had a more loyal team that was not going to countermand him. And that's where you're seeing in the markets worry that Trump was serious when he talked about this. With voters, you saw a Gallup poll this week where he's negative 18 on the economy. That's the lowest record they had for Trump because this is the first time he is making decisions that people do not think are reflecting what he promised. This is not the economy that they thought they would get when he was saying he could turn the dial back to 2019.
So, John, given that we've got Doge and all of the cuts that Elon Musk has made, we've got a deportation agenda that seems to be barreling forward despite what is happening in the courts, is that going to be enough for congressional Republicans to run on for midterms if the economy does not turn around?
Not yet, because they're not scared yet. And usually when the party in power in Congress gets scared, it's too late. Obviously we're still early in this cycle, but what we've seen in midterm cycle after midterm is that the members of Congress stand with the president for as long as they can, and then they turn around, realize they're in trouble, and it's way too late to do anything about it. We'll see how the economy progresses. Dave's right. Donald Trump promised on day one that he would reverse inflation. He made a lot of other day one promises. I think all of these issues, some of these issues are separate. The deportations are separate. That is much more popular than inflation is. Inflation is about as unpopular as it gets. And by the way, it touches everyone, right? Whether you're buying milk or a mega yacht, you feel inflation. And so I think that's something that's really problematic for him. It's problematic for Republican voters. And by the way, he's in love with tariffs. He's been in love with tariffs for 40 years. And going back and forth on whether or not he's going to apply tariffs to other countries, all it does is unsettle not just the financial markets, but the various industries that are affected. It unsettles farmers, and they're unable to predict what their costs are going to be going forward. So he's not helping them.
I did not conduct most of the business that I did on behalf of our country on email. I conducted it in meetings. I read massive amounts of memos, great deal of classified information. I made a lot of secure phone calls. If you were to be in my office in the State Department, I didn't have a computer. I did not do the vast majority of my work on email.
Hillary Clinton is someone who certainly knows a thing or two about the importance of protecting private messages. And she has only one word for the war plans group chat fiasco: dumb. In an op-ed for the New York Times, the former Secretary of State calls the president's administration dumb, not once, not twice, but 6 different times. And not just because they accidentally shared war plans with a journalist. Quote, "The Trump approach is dumb power. Instead of a strong America using all our strengths to lead the world and confront our adversaries, Mr. Trump's America will be increasingly blind and blundering, feeble and friendless." For more, I have 2 of the best to do it, bringing in Basil Smikle, who is a Democratic strategist and former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party. He is also now an MSNBC political analyst and a Columbia University professor, as well as Susan Del Percio, an MSNBC political analyst and veteran political strategist. Basil, your take immediately in terms of how you respond to former Secretary of State Clinton's op-ed in the New York Times.
Well, she will always be my boss. She was my boss in the U.S. Senate. And working for her, I know that resolve. I know her thinking. The clip you showed, if I remember correctly, was from the Benghazi hearing. Proud moment for a staffer, watching her just be there and have that opportunity to be so solid in her responses in that moment. And she's and I'm glad you led with that, because I reflect on that moment when I think about the op-ed. She talks so importantly about the hard skills and soft skills when doing foreign policy. Yes, you can show strength, but there's also a lot of stuff in part that goes with, let's say, USAID and the goodwill that you spread around the world, right? All of the soft skills, like going and actually meeting with people and engaging people, like you have to be able to do those things too and do them very well. And just very quickly, I thought of, when I read that op-ed, I also thought about Colin Powell, because if you want another voice to kind of co-sign some of this, sure, Colin Powell's a good voice, because he talked about things like HIV and food insecurity, famine, water insecurity, that actually can create national crises and national insecurity around the world. So if you don't engage those things, you are creating more dangerous situations for us everywhere. And so she's speaking to that and saying, you know what, for all of what you're doing, and the fact that you're doing it on a commercial platform, it is just dumb.
You know, I can't help but to think that even as this conversation is occurring, she's speaking from a place of normalcy, a place of where we were before. And it seems as though that train may have left the station. I mean, she has said in her piece that she's not focused on the hypocrisy. But Susan, the hypocrisy is really, really stupid. Like, it's really obvious, right? So you're talking about Hillary Clinton, who spent 11 hours testifying before Congress. You're talking about how Joe Biden had documents in his garage. You're talking about these email servers, but you're not talking about the president and what he had in Mar-a-Lago that he actually got indicted for. Right. You're not talking about how this potential breach of national security is being addressed. Is there a need, from a strategist's point, to actually reconcile this blatant sense of hypocrisy?
Well, for the country's sake, yes, there is a need, and we should do it. And I think, just going to Secretary Clinton's op-ed again, the thing that when she kept saying dumb, I kept thinking of is that these people who are in, most of the Defense Secretary Hegseth, RFK Jr., so many of Trump's picks are not qualified. They don't know how to run an organization. They didn't know, I'm willing to bet they actually, like a Hegseth, didn't know how bad it was that he did this on Signal. I'm not joking. Now, there were other people who should have known, like the CIA director, but I'm not sure he knows how bad it was, because as we're just learning tonight, he even had his wife's in on matters of security meetings. So he doesn't really put a great emphasis on that. And that's what happens with Donald Trump, and why I think he only knows what that hard, tough power is about. He doesn't understand soft power because he doesn't know how the world works. Yeah. He's choosing, he knows what he wants to project. He knows what he wants, and he thinks if he just is loud enough and angry enough and threatening enough, that's how you get it. But I don't know if he knows what we should be going after. We want a stable world. Yeah. You mentioned, USAID, what that does, and vaccinations and around the world, that keeps people healthy and safe. It stops uprisings, and that's what you want. But that's not what Donald Trump wants, because Donald Trump can't quantify that to himself. He can't measure it.
Right. It's a very interesting metric that you're talking about being used. And speaking of metrics, Basil, we've got what voters say they want and then what voters do, right? Like, this is not the first sense of outrage that we've seen from the electorate or the potential electorate around something that Donald Trump has done, but it doesn't necessarily translate into votes. We've seen a lot of outrage across the country at various Republican town halls, so much so that Democrats are now going where Republicans seem to be hiding. But the real question is this going to be enough to matter?
Yeah, well, I still have my tear-stained jacket from 2016. So I think about what matters and what doesn't every single day. Because I remember, being on TV talking about why are we talking about Hillary Clinton's emails so much? Because it didn't need to matter as much as it did. And trying to push back on that narrative clearly was ineffective. The question is it going to be effective now if we attack Donald Trump with it? And we were talking earlier, for his base, not at all. They're not going to care, right? Because their support for him goes well beyond the norms that we've been talking about. But there are going to be a lot of voters, I think, that will feel similarly to where they were around COVID and the 2020 election. And what I mean by that is, I think a lot of folks forgot about the chaos of a Trump presidency. And this reminds that there's not just chaos, but there is now this growing feeling that I may not be terribly safe because of the behavior of these folks who are not necessarily qualified for the jobs that they have. And if Democrats can remind those independent voters, those voters that voted for Trump but may have voted Democratic in other ways, the Trump voter that voted for AOC in her district, right? Those kinds of voters I do think are persuadable, and that's where Democrats need to focus.
Yeah, but
I got to ask you, Susan, really quickly. We're seeing a lot of state races that are closer than they should be in districts that Trump won by double digits. Really quickly, on a scale of 1 to 10, how worried do you think the rest of the party is about being able to move forward?
3. I don't think they're worried because, well, a few things. One is when we talk about these special elections in Florida, for example, or the one that Donald Trump pulled Elise Stefanik from in upstate New York, even though she won with 30% of the vote, or he won with 30% or 30 points. These are special elections. They operate in their own environment. They're different. They're not a national movement. And I think too often we forget that. So I wouldn't look at necessarily as a big sign. But here's the important thing to remember as we're looking at what the electorate wants. Donald Trump doesn't care what they want. Donald Trump doesn't care about the midterm elections. He knows he has to get everything done in the next 18 months. He's probably going to lose it. He doesn't care by how much. If he can't get what he wants from people, it doesn't matter.
Basil, Susan, thank you.
If the people of Greenland were willing to partner with the United States, and I think that they ultimately will partner with the United States, we could make them much more secure, we could do a lot more protection, and I think they'd fare a lot better economically as well. This has to happen.
That was Vice President J.D. Vance in Greenland today, and it was really creepy. President Donald Trump has repeatedly threatened that he wants to take it over, saying, one way or the other, we're going to get it, which is also creepy. And his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, appears to think that that is actually a reasonable aim, saying that the U.S. has deep historical roots in Greenland. That really sounds a lot like Putin's own justification for invading Ukraine. Historian John Meacham joins me now. He's the Rogers Chair in the American Presidency at Vanderbilt University. John, thanks for being with me. Putin says that we should not treat this pursuit of Greenland as preposterous. And obviously we're here talking about it, but is there a danger that by us even discussing it, it helps to build momentum around the idea? Should it be covered differently? Should we leave it alone for now? How concerned should we be at this point?
It's a great question, and I find myself very rarely agreeing with Vladimir Putin, but I think his read of Donald Trump has proven to be pretty apt over the last decade. I think we can say that President Putin has gotten a great deal of what he wants, and so he understands Donald Trump in a way that perhaps some Americans still don't. So I think there is a great deal of gravity to this. The Vice President of the United States is in the country talking about this, and to my mind, this connects with the discussion you were just having, which is President Trump, there may be a case for a larger presence or control in Greenland, but what is that case? It's not as if we're living in a world where governance is normal. In a normal world, if there was some reason for strategic reasons to have a larger role there, then an American president would make a case. He would lay it out. He would have congressional allies talking about it. There would be hearings. We would actually have a democratic, lowercase d, debate about this. Instead, and maybe this is unfair, but I don't think so, this is one of those things that seems to have come out of nowhere. And therefore, I think people are confused by it. I think people who are pro-Trump probably like the tough talk. People who are anti-President Trump are probably not taking it seriously enough.
So, John, people use the term geopolitical landscape a lot, but there has been an order in the world since World War II. Can you help us understand how this sort of talk really just upends that in its entirety from a geopolitical landscape space?
Well, the lesson of the 20th century, which has deep roots in all of human history, is that territorial aggression leads to cataclysmic strife. It happened with traditional empires from 1914 to 1918. It happened again in the 1930s and 1940s, both in Europe and in Asia. And the American insight, the lesson that we took from those two terrible and defining wars was that democracies tend not to go to war with each other. They tend to trade with each other. They tend to create an order that enables them to lead lives of prosperity and purpose and not have to live in what Dwight Eisenhower called a garrison state, always waiting, always watching for someone to come take your territory, take what is yours. The notion of the United Nations, the guiding ideology coming out of, and this is not left or right, by the way. This is Winston Churchill. This is not soft one world or stuff. This is, if we have a lawless world where anyone who desires or covets what someone else has and they just go and take it, that leads to chaos. And so the rule of law, about which we have so many important conversations at home these days, also, in a broader sense, applies to the world. And you simply can't take what you want simply because you want it. And the Americans have sacrificed and invested an immense amount of blood and treasure since 1945, imperfectly, but trying to create a world where aggression, as George Herbert Walker Bush said, would not stand.
You know, John, we're still trying to figure out everything around what is even motivating this conversation. But so much of what you've said has added so much important context to just understanding the implications. And I'm sure we'll be talking again. Thank you for joining us on this Friday night. And when we return,
cruelty and venom, harshly judging those we disagree with. It's become sport in our culture. But cruelty and venom aren't proof of strength. They're signs of weakness and petty insecurity. What takes strength is switching places and putting yourself in someone else's shoes.
We are living in a time when the future seems uncertain. We see anger and frustration at town halls and lack of empathy from leaders. We don't have that here. On this show, you know, we've always got time to pause and love, but we don't speak for everybody because now the U.S. has dropped to a record low in the World Happiness Index at 24. That is down from 11 over a decade ago. So what is the key to turning this around? Here to discuss is New York Times best-selling author Brad Meltzer. You know I am his super fan, and he's got a new book out, Make Magic, the book of inspiration you didn't know you needed. It came out this month. I absolutely knew I needed it, and I'm so glad he's here. Brad, congratulations on the book. We need your help. What is your read on where things are today in this country?
Listen, we're in a terrible place right now because all we're doing is fighting. All we're doing is finding enemies as opposed to making peace. But and here's what happens with empathy. As I said in the speech, is when things get really hard, when the news gets bad, we shut down. And what we do is we swipe off that app, we turn off the TV, we say, I'm not going to watch that show anymore, it depresses me. Do not shut down. We need you right now. If you shut down, we're in trouble. But here's the good news, Stephanie, is empathy is malleable. I mean, if you want to have more empathy, all you have to do is want to have more empathy. It's like when you're in college, you make your most friends freshman year. Why? Because you decide, I'm going to make my most friends right now. And so as long as you're open to it, that's how you bring it into your life. You cannot let everyone beat you down. And I know it's a hard time right now.
When you talk about making magic, what does that look like? Why is it so important? Because those are nice words, but it's for a lot of people, they don't know what that means. They don't know how to find it.
Right. And right now someone's saying, oh, it's easy for you to make magic, or what does that even mean? Or that's silly. But here's the thing. If you actually break it down and you talk to magicians, there are only 4 types of magic tricks. Put aside illusions and escapes. There's 4 types of tricks. 1, you make something appear. 2, you make something disappear. 3, you make 2 things switch places. And the 4th magic trick is you take one thing and you turn it into something else, which is the hardest trick of all, transformation. And what the book is all about, and what my speech was all about, is what you need to make appear, that best version of you. What you need to have things switch places, that's your empathy. That's what empathy is, right? It's 2 things switching places. To transform, you got to keep always being different, right? You can't, and I mean different in your thinking. Don't write in pen, write in pencil, and use the eraser. Don't be afraid to use the eraser. The person who thinks they're the smartest in the room is not the smartest in the room. That's just the one with the most fragile ego. The most sophisticated and intelligent people I know are those who know there's always more to learn. The only immutable fact is you should never be immutable. And these are easy, kind of simple things that you can use in your everyday life. That's what the book is about. But I think one of the most important ones is what you have to make disappear. And it's not your fear. What you have to do is use your fear and harness it. And I can tell you a story if you have the time, but these are the lessons that when I was trying to figure out what each magic trick should be, my wife said to me, you know what? Just focus on the best advice you have for your child, for your son. Because when I was giving this speech at Michigan, I was a graduate from Michigan. My son was graduating too. And there were 70,000 people in that stadium, but I was looking at one, my son who was in the 14th row. So what you're hearing from me are the ways, it's magic that we all need right now. And that's why the little subtitle in the book is The Book of Inspiration You Didn't Know You Needed, because we all need some inspiration right now. That's what this book is anyone you know out there who's graduating or whether they're just need a little bit help right now, give them some magic.
But isn't it so funny? Like, here we are. You have brought me to tears. This is the second time we've spoken, and every time you do. You said something a moment ago when you talked about magic, and you said, oh, maybe people think it's silly. Why is it that words or ideas like magic or love or even empathy, people connect that to being silly or small or unserious, when in reality, they're the most powerful things there are?
Of course, that's where strength comes from, right? If you really want to shock the world, unleash your kindness, right? So, and that to me is what it's all about. Stop seeing those things as weaknesses. They come from strengths, right? I mean, and I think right now we are having this kind of dance where we're trying to figure out who we are, and anyone that doesn't like the things you like or agree with the things you do, we brand them as an enemy and we say they're horrible, terrible people. It's really hard to change other people. All you can do is change yourself. If you're going to try and change other people, go hold your breath or bang your head against the wall. It's much more efficient.
You know I love every word you are saying. My heart is filled with joy. But do you have faith that this country will be able to transform? Because everything you're saying, I believe, I want it to happen. And when we finish talking, I'm going to dig back into the news, and I know I'm going to quickly feel disheartened. Do you think we can transform? And if so, what's it going to take?
I think what it always takes is a leader who brings us together. That's the solution always. And you know what I know as a person who studies history, as a historian myself, the one thing I know is all this stuff right now, it's just for now. And we will get through it. And again, I'm talking about not just the politics of it, but I remember those days I buried my parents. I remember those days my dad lost his job. I remember those days when it was the end of the month and we knew don't answer the doorbell and don't answer the phone because that's when the bill collectors call. My sister knew growing up, you don't answer the door on the 30th day of the month because that's when they're coming for the rent, and my family didn't have it. And those times passed too. And I know there are people right now saying, well, what are you going to do about my thing? And sometimes we can feel as a country like we're in a car crash and the car is still spinning. But as someone who's been in the car crash, it does slow down. And I think right now, when I look at from George Washington to obviously Abraham Lincoln, I look to JFK, I look to FDR, I look to those great leaders, and what do they have in common? They were leaders that brought us together. And I do believe we'll get there again. Is that naive? Of course it's naive. But again, an idea worth fighting for.